More moves are coming for the Toronto Raptors as Bobby Webster cleaned house on the back end of the roster yesterday, and we got some new updates regarding what's going on with Ulrich Chomche, as well as the next moves that the Raptors are setting up heading into this season. So we'll discuss that, including a lot of discourse going around right now regarding Scottie Barnes and the current injuries he is dealing with, as that has serious implications on this Toronto Raptors team going forward. So lots of interesting stuff to break down out here in this video. But folks, the season's just a few days away, and I appreciate all of the support we've been getting out here on the channel. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button if you are a part of the 53% that have not hit the sub button just yet, because I don't want you to miss a single thing that's going on with this Toronto Raptors team. But let's dive into the news, because frankly, there's a lot of stuff to go through. And of course, if you missed it yesterday, we got an update that the Raptors ended up waiving Ulrich Chomche, who missed training camp with an undisclosed injury. They've also waived AJ Lawson, Jared Rhoden, David Roddy, as well as Olivier Sarr, all on non and partial guarantees, leaving the roster at 14 people, as well as opening up a two-way spot. So, of course, you have this flexibility. The Raptors are in an interesting spot cap-wise, and we know that Bobby Webster has to take a look at the salary cap management, because we have a lot of players out there on this team that are making a lot of money. We take a look at just the top end of this roster: Brandon Ingram, Scottie Barnes, Immanuel Quickley, all on very significant contracts. RJ Barrett and Jakob Poeltl, of course, are well paid as well. And then a bunch of legit rotation players in the NBA are making solid salaries. But the top five, especially on this roster, are making serious money. So the Raptors need that extra little bit of wiggle room to stay underneath the luxury tax and not be dealing with all these tax implications that now have a big impact on this team moving forward into the future. So even though they have roster spot flexibility, cap-wise, there's question marks about what their plans are for the next moves for this team. And one name that was very interesting in those cuts and those selections is AJ Lawson, because he is someone that impressed a lot of people out there for the Raptors last season. 9 points per game, 3.3 rebounds, 1.2 assists, and shot well from the three-point line, but slashed. He was only 25 years old. He's Canadian, a very exciting player. So what is the plan with him? What is the future? What are things looking at? Well, Michael Grange illuminated on our first report about moves and changes and stuff incoming, as Michael Grange essentially revealed that the Raptors waived Ulrich Chomche, opened up a two-way spot, and I wouldn't be surprised if they use it to keep Mississauga's AJ Lawson in the fold. He has a lot of fans in the Raptors coaching staff. So that is coming from Michael Grange. And this is the sentiment that a lot of Raptors fans had. Of course, you go to Twitter, you go to Reddit, a lot of people were very much in shock when AJ Lawson was a part of the cuts, myself included. I thought he would be on the roster, just given the fact that his cap hit isn't that high, so you can afford to make some moves at the trade deadline if you want to get under the tax, or the team's really good, you keep it as deep as possible. But AJ Lawson was a surprise cut. But now with Ulrich Chomche getting cut, and we do have some updates on him, so stay tuned for that. But basically, AJ Lawson is in a position to end up landing that two-way contract. Now, I'm sure Bobby Webster is going to do his due diligence, look across the league and see what is the best high upside move that they can use for that two-way spot, because again, the two ways have less implications out there on the cap. They're smaller salary, they play off the games, all that type of stuff. But basically, AJ Lawson, of course, I think is going to be the most talented guy that's available out there on the open market, unless you're going to go some weird routes, with that two-way contract. He's already in the system. He's already proven that he, could be effective out there on this team. So him at the two-way spot would be very, very encouraging. I think a lot of Raptors fans would be excited about it. But one thing that Raptors fans were a bit frustrated about out there in this spot is Ulrich Chomche, because he is a guy that is extremely high upside. And looking at the Raptors depth chart, right? We look at this team. There's not a lot of guys, right next to my face right there. Not a lot of guys out there at that center position, especially at the depth. And we know big men usually end up missing at least 10 to 20 games in a good year in terms of being healthy. So, without Jakob Poeltl, you have Immanuel Quickley, who's a bit undersized for that role. A good floor spacer, can, play above his size and all that. But, there you have Murray Boyles can slide up there. Jonathan Bobo, who there's rumors that he grew this season, all that type of stuff. There are options the Raptors have at that center spot. But I think Ulrich Chomche is the guy that a lot of people were excited to see if he had an opportunity. And now we got some more insights in terms of why he was cut and what the plans could be for him going forward. So the first update is why he ended up getting cut. What was the reasoning? Well, Michael Grange came out and said that my understanding that Chomche, who did not take part in training camp and whose condition was not updated by the Raps, will have to be evaluated by the league's fitness to play panel in order to return to action. Similar process to what Christian Koloko went through a couple of years back. Now, this is a very, very unfortunate update because, of course, with Christian Koloko, his injury or whatever they called it is that he ended up having blood clotting issues out there. And, of course, those are things you really don't want to mess with. And they're things that are tough to recover from. Of course, I'm not a doctor, but if Ulrich Chomche is dealing with something similar where you have to go to the fitness to play, you don't usually get that even for, an injury like he had last season, a torn MCL. You don't usually see these reports, see guys getting cut out there for those types of injuries. You usually get them for things that are a little bit more worrisome. So I'm wishing, firstly, the best for Ulrich Chomche. Health as a human being is the most important thing, but of course, as a basketball guy that has so much potential, so much raw potential, the upside there, you hate to see that bit of talent, I don't want to say wasted, but just stripped away from a guy that seemed like he was developing, seemed like he was bought in, seemed like just a good person out there in the locker room. So that's one of the main reasons he ended up getting cut. Of course, Bobby Webster, Chomche felt like Masai Ujiri's pet project, all that type of stuff. Bobby Webster cementing his, stamp out there on this team. But of course, everyone wanted to see this plan go through. That's one of the reasons he got cut. And one thing we could be looking at is a Chomche return. Now, in the past, with Christian Koloko, when he ended up getting cut by this team, Bobby Webster's a part of that front office. The Raptors were one of the finalists to land him back. Of course, he ended up going to the LA Lakers, a team where he hasn't really, immediately been a staple out there in the rotation, but they had some openings there at the center position, so there's a lot of opportunities for him to get actual run and stuff, so it made sense, opportunity-wise for him to go down there. But the Raptors were one of the finalists to land Christian Koloko when he was essentially reinstated by the NBA, approved to play. And Ulrich Chomche could be in the mix to end up returning there at that point, especially if the organization values him and, he has his relationships here, all of that type of stuff. Of course, Masai not being here, that does shake things up out there on that front, but I wouldn't rule out Ulrich Chomche being out there in the future. So that is one thing that we can take a look at. And then also we got this update here from a little tidbit there from Blake Murphy saying that, the Raptors have a two-way open spot now. Lawson decision came down to keeping a 15th guy, but luxury tax book room, that type of stuff. But I said, expect a few of these guys with the 905. So, Rodin, expect some of these, guys that were cut, maybe even Roddy, one of these players out there to join the Toronto Raptors 905, Olivier Sarr. So that's a positive because I liked a lot of these guys at the deep end of the roster. And then, of course, if AJ Lawson's back, he, of course, 905 implications there. So hoping that those guys are back, hoping those guys are back in the mix. But what's going on with their top guy? The guy that's, of course, not going to cut or anything along those lines, but Scottie Barnes, a player that has certainly, had an up and down preseason, shown a lot defensively, but there's been a lot of criticism thrown the way, with him in this new looked Toronto Raptors lineup. And basically, what's resurfacing is a report from last week, and visually, you see Scottie Barnes out there on the court. He looks a little bit hobbled, playing a little bit tentative. Of course, it's preseason as well, so that's one thing to factor in. But one thing that's just getting, re-aggregated now at this point, so I'll do it as well, is Barnes is out with, in that Sacramento Kings game, the Celtics game, Barnes was out with left knee tendinopathy as well as tendinitis, or slash tendinitis. So that is something, an injury that, again, they're not injuries where it's like, oh, okay, sprained wrist, you're good 2 weeks later or something. Tendinitis, tendinopathy, those are injuries that you hear. It's like, okay, they're a bit more acute. They're stuff that, can cause issues if you're aggravating it and aggravating it and aggravating it. And that is the last thing that you want to hear from your star player, Scottie Barnes. You do not want to hear him playing and suffering through an injury this entire season. The Raptors have dealt with so many injuries over the past couple of years, and some of them, maybe been overstated, so they end up losing more games. But Scottie Barnes dealing with a tendinopathy issue. Why is he even playing in preseason? And that's more so what the discourse has been. The decision makers, it doesn't make sense to play Scottie Barnes out there in these events when you have guys that have some opportunities. Of course, CMB is dealing with an injury as well. But when you have guys that can take advantage of opportunities, extra minutes out there in preseason, and let Scottie Barnes get healthy for the start of the year. It doesn't make a ton of sense. I get the value of, this new looked Raptors lineup, having them all come in, get reps, and be in that mix, but it's still not something that I'm very happy with if he's, seriously injured or he's dealing with something that could be, at least aided somewhat by an extra weeks of rest. So that is what it is. Wishing the best there for Scottie Barnes, who's dealing with tendinopathy issue right now. But let me know what you guys think about all this in the comment section down below. Use the best thing as far as subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. Anyways, I'm signing out. Cheers.